Is that showing up?
Okay. Yeah, it's working. I see you well.
Okay. I could maybe put it on the other screen, but if that works okay. Okay, that works nicely. Are
It's
people
okay.
are people going to be writing their questions in the chat?
Yeah, because we are using the webinar session, because it's easy to control and to separate people, more people inside, more the audience can increase. So Professor Walter and me, we will get the questions from the chat and tell you what people said. And we have also the YouTube working at the same time. So you get some, if you have some questions in the YouTube, you can share with you and you can participate. So you moderate this connection.
Okay, and are people do they type the questions into YouTube?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You can see also the question, but we can help to you to not take a look in the chat and say, you say what you read in the chat.
Okay.
And you can answer direct to people.
That sounds good. I think we'll do that. So I won't monitor those. I'll just let you guys monitor those for me. And if there's ever anything you need to say to me privately, I need to get my phone. Okay, here's my phone. Just want to make sure. So we'll stop at
Okay.
at 5 o'clock. What's the time that we stop? 3:15 to 5?
Yeah, you can have your time. Do what you'd like to show, and you can talk. So.
Okay. Well, I have, what I did was I have 3 different things that I can talk about. And they're all related to the topic of creating high impact scholarship. Is it the exact name? Can you just remind me what the promotion said? I forget now. Did it say high impact?
The name of the let me see here. Yeah, you just 1 minute. I have so many documents open here. You put here developing high impact marketing scholarship in editor's view.
Okay, developing high impact marketing scholarship. Okay. So what I'll probably do is spend some time first on this one, and I don't have to start sharing that. I can share that after you introduce me, if that seems better, so that the screen stays.
Okay.
And then I can share this, and then I have a couple of other points too. Then one is an editorial that we wrote for the Journal of Marketing that really gets at sort of the same topic. And then the third thing is a presentation from about basically just about the Journal of Marketing that updates people on some of the activities that are going on within the journal and that might be helpful to people.
Great. Okay, can you unshare now for a while, because I can introduce it for all people.
Perfect.
And you can see here on the right side the attendees. We already have the audience, 26 people. You can, well, the time is supposed to start at 4:15. We were in another panel before, so I think you can get more 5 minutes for people to arrive. We had 100 people in the other panel participating, so it's supposed to have the same people here.
Okay.
Participating online. And I introduce you, tell some parts I got from the internet, a lot of things. So I got a part to introduce you for people, for the audience. And after that, you can start and you can manage what you want.
Okay.
Please, Walter, say it.
Hello, Professor Christine.
Hi, Alfonso.
Hello.
Walter or Alfonso?
Walter.
Walter is the first name. Alfonso is the second one, the middle name.
I see.
I have a curiosity. If you can talk about in the end, how, if it's possible, of course, how many articles do you process per year in terms of number of submission, the percent of rejection, the percentage of approbation, and so forth? Because each year since last 10 years, the bar is increasing a lot. And for just about in terms of curiosity to know the numbers.
Sure, sure. I had that in the Journal of Marketing presentation. I took it out, but I can just go through it verbally with everyone, just so they can understand the numbers.
Yeah, to give an idea, that's good.
Good, will do. So how's everything going on down there with the pandemic? Are things getting better for you guys?
You're hard. I think that we are getting the vaccination here in Brazil, but it's not so fast as in US, but we heard a lot of different things in the rest of the world that is not fast also. So I think some people are stressed because look, we are going very slow, okay, but we have to understand that just US is very fast in these things. They have a lot of money, so they did everything very fast. But the rest of the world, when you see many countries are even worse than us, but it's slow, very slow.
That's right.
We are the young people, well, people from 50s, they did not get the vaccine yet. So we just have the 60, 70, and people with some special needs about diabetic and pressure, health pressures, blood pressure. But it's low, it's very slow.
Yeah, it'll change. What happened here was it was very slow, then all of a sudden it sped up, so I think and hopefully as we need less of the vaccine, we can give more to people around the world. We should be doing more of that anyway, but it's hard when people here still want it. Some people still want it, but they're vaccinating the teenagers now here. So I would think that
we heard.
Yeah, they should really be sharing more of it. So.
Yes, that's a good point. I was talking with my friend at the Iowa State University and Clemson University. All of them took the shot. But on the opposite side, in Japan, we are 3 months before the Olympics game, and 3% of the population had the vaccine.
Wow.
2 months before the games.
Wow. Yeah, that's a very difficult situation there.
Yep. Just more 3 minutes and you can start.
Okay.
In the public universities here, Professor Christian, we are still in a remote way teaching classes. In the PhD, undergraduate, and MBA classes, we are still in a remote way.
I think we were too until this summer people don't teach, but I think in the fall it will all be back to face. So which is good. It's hard to do it.
We are supposed to stay until December, until the end of the year. We keep in remote. It's not supposed to return now, just next year.
Okay.
Some federal universities already said, look, it's better to wait. So you stay using the remote connection.
That makes sense. I think that makes sense. You just need to be careful because if you make a mistake in the reentry, it can be disastrous. And young people are the biggest carriers, because they don't really take as many of the precautions. That's what we found here at Duke. They create some new problems if they're not careful,
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I would love to be there in person. Do you do this every year?
This conference now, we just have each 3 years because this is the divisional conference. But we have every year the conference that is in October. Because we don't have the marketing association. We have the business administration association, that it's AMPAD. It's a graduate and research association for business administration. So we have the divisions, accountability, public administration, And we have marketing as one of divisions. We have 10 divisions, 11 divisions. And the marketing is the biggest division in the association. So you have every 3 years, a special conference about marketing, just marketing. And every year we have the general conference that we have all divisions work at the same time. And most of times, not most, all the conference about the AMPA that is in October, they are in the big cities because it's too many people. It's 1,500 people in one conference. So yeah, it's very big because all divisions together. So we have in São Paulo, Rio, Curitiba, which more? About to help me.
Oh, you're muted.
I did not remember right now.
Yeah, but it just, in the main parts was the São Paulo, Rio, and because the other cities, they don't have capability to have at the same time, I don't know, 100 rooms with class with different sessions. So it's very big.
Oh, you're getting one of your attendees is correcting you.
Yeah,
Thank
but
you, Fabiano.
it's probably the ex-coordinator. Okay, I think you can start. Already have 78 participants in the session. Professor Christine Moorman, first of all, I'd like to ask just 1 minute, our panelists, Takao or Rafael, if you can start to recording. Professor Christine, you just recording now, and we will send to you a document if you agree to share this presentation later. If you agree, you can use and put in the website to use. If you not, don't worry, you delete the recording. So because to organize and be fast with that, we do this way, and we send later requests for you about that. So I'd like, first of all, thank you very much for participating in our conference as a keynote speaker. Main presentation of our conference. I'd like to thank you, Professor Dennis Shah from Georgia State University, because he introduced me to you to have this opportunity to have you here with us participating. Unfortunately, it's online, but who knows, in the future, maybe you can have a new opportunity and have something presential. So I really appreciate. Professor Christine Moorman is the T. Aust Finch Senior Professor of Business Administration at the Fuqua School of Business, Duke University, where she is a member of the marketing area. Professor Moorman's expertise lies in examining the nature and effects of learning and knowledge utilization by consumers, managers, organizations, and financial markets. She has been published in a range of top journals, including the Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Marketing Research, Marketing Science, among others. Professor Moorman is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Marketing currently, and privileged an associate editor for the Journal of Marketing Research and the Journal of Marketing, as well as an IRB member for Marketing Science and the Journal of Consumer Research. So it's a very prestigious professor. I really appreciate for your presence here. Please feel free to share with us your experience and expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Emilio, and welcome to all of you. I'm looking forward to this session. I would much rather be in person with all of you in Brazil. Have never been, so we'll look forward to that in the future. The topic that Professor Arruda asked me to speak about is the idea of developing high-impact research and marketing, and I'm going to speak about that both in my experience as an author, but also in my experiences as an editor and as an associate editor, and share with you some of the things that I think are most important in that quest. And of course, you'll have your own advisors and you'll have your own experiences, but kind of think about the things that I'm going to ask you to consider. We'll have some practice opportunities during this session as well. And if you have comments or questions, you can also place those into the Q&A tab here in Zoom, and we'll have some windows of time when I can address those. But I'm also happy to take clarification questions as they emerge. So let's start with, I have sort of 3 different presentations that I'll try to work in during this hour and 45 minutes with plenty of time for questions. So let's just start with the first and see how far we get, and then we'll proceed from there. So I think that should be coming through okay. Is that coming through with developing ideas from the real world of marketing? Okay,
It's working.
wonderful. So I want to talk with you about this idea because this is really important to the Journal of Marketing. But I also think the idea of turning to the real world of marketing as a source of ideas is a very fruitful way for you to think about developing research. And I think there's a number of benefits to you as future scholars, and some of you are already professors. And that is when you start with the real world of marketing and that deep focus there, which is the circle in the middle, you can think about not only better ideas, which is one of the things that I'm going to argue with you today, but also your work is going to have stronger marketing relevance. So when you start with the real world, it's much more likely that you'll be able to develop something that should be helpful to a marketer or a public policy maker who's dealing with marketing problems. Not only that, it also makes you potentially a better teacher because now you really have those examples, you have this sense of what's going on in the real world, which your students will definitely want. If your students are like mine, they really want to know what's going on in the real world because that's where they're going. And so you have a better way of connecting with them in the classroom as a result of adopting this approach. And so what we want to focus on in this talk, this first talk, is really the benefits to better ideas. And we can talk about the other ones later, but this one just really coming up with just stronger ideas. And why is that important to you? Well, it's important because I'm going to argue that this is the way that you can try to increase the likelihood that your research will have impact, that you'll be able to make a contribution, which if you've ever published or tried to publish something in a journal, that's usually the main thing that journals are looking for. Do you really make a contribution to thinking in this area? So that people say, wow, I really learned something from that article. That's what journal editors are looking for. That's what people who are going to be awarding you tenure are likely looking for. They're looking for that contribution. So you're not doing something derivative, meaning it's been done and maybe you're redoing it. You're doing something really new and interesting. So what do we mean when we say make a contribution or have an impact? Well, research that makes an impact usually, I can say for certain, doesn't necessarily correlate perfectly with these things. So what impact is not? It's not just publishing. There's a lot of papers that get published that never, ever have an impact. People, they may be read by one person, they may never be cited. Now, publishing in a high-profile journal also doesn't guarantee you impact. It gives you some exposure, it gives you a platform because people see your name in that journal, but it doesn't really guarantee you will have an impact. An impact is completely independent of method. A lot of the papers that I'm going to talk about with you today, some of them use experiments, some of them use qualitative work, some of them use archival data, some of them use field experiments. There's a lot of different ways to get to impact. In fact, you don't even have to do you don't even have to have data. You can just work on developing a conceptual framework, which is a perfectly legitimate way to have an impact. So I think impact is better revealed by asking Jerry Zaltman's question. So who's Jerry Zaltman? Jerry Zaltman was my advisor. And one of the things, and he's also, he was a University of Pittsburgh professor, which is where I met him. And then he went on to the Harvard Business School. He's now retired. But when we were students, he would ask us this question all the time. And it's a question that I really want you to embrace. So, write it down, think about it, or take a picture. I don't know how you're following the presentation, but his question was the following: how many people will change what they're doing or thinking by how much if you answer this research question? So if you answer, well, maybe no one, then it's probably not worth a question that's, that's worth answering. What you're looking for is, this could really change, at least a decent number of people's, ways of thinking or acting. And so it's worthy to go forward with your research. So what that really focuses on is kind of the generativity and and also the impact of your ideas. So when we think about impact, what I would encourage you to think about, instead of just publishing a paper, is how many people are citing your paper. More importantly, how many papers actually follow you on a topic. So if you come up with a new idea, let's say something like market orientation, which some of you may have heard about, that's been cited, I don't know, maybe 10,000 times. And there's probably 2,000 or 3,000 papers that have followed from that initial research. The same thing with things like service quality. So think about the number of papers that follow your paper. And then also any of these stakeholders, practitioners, policymakers, or any like a societal stakeholder, somebody who's interested in like an NGO or whatever, are they influenced by your advice, or could they be influenced by your advice? That's what we're really looking for here when we think about impact. Those are much better metrics. So what is impact predicted by? I think it's really predicted by two things. First, the importance of your ideas. And that goes directly to that question: how many people would change their ideas or their behaviors if you did this research? And you can think about writing, that first couple of paragraphs in your paper, and you can say, this is a really important problem. Marketers are wasting a lot of money doing this way, or climate change is a big issue for the world, or obesity is a big problem. Whatever the problem happens to be, there's something that's really important about your ideas. That's what we're getting at here. The other thing is how interesting your ideas are. What we're looking for here when we think about impact is that your ideas are not obvious. They're a bit surprising. People are excited to learn what you've said. So that might be a novel topic. You might have a novel theory. You might have just novel findings. Like you might have some big surprise that comes up in your data that you can reveal in your article. So these are two ways to think about it: importance and how interesting the ideas are. In fact, this is a very nice quote by Murray Davis, who wrote an article called "That's Interesting." And you probably, if you looked it up, you'll see it cited in a lot of research in marketing. He says a theorist is considered great, not because his theories are true, but because they're interesting. So they make people think. They get people thinking on a particular topic. Of course, we want to get as close to the truth as we can, but truth per se is not going to bring you impact if it's obvious, if people already know that it's true. So that's one thing that you always want to be checking with your research. How much am I really adding to this topic if I start to study this? And make sure that you feel that it's justified going forward before you invest a lot of time. And the other reason I say this to you, and actually the main reason as an editor, is that editorial decisions, those are the decisions made by an editor or an associate editor, they tend to be really dominated by how interesting and important your ideas are, not really how perfect your studies are. I mean, your studies have to be valid. You have to produce valid insights. But it's the case, actually, in my experience, that strong ideas can compensate for imperfect studies. But perfect studies can't compensate for weak ideas. And I think in a lot of cases, students and junior faculty, they spend a lot of time trying to get the perfect study, but not work as hard on coming up with the best ideas. So what you want to do here is you really want to be checking as you go along, especially in the early months, maybe even the first year as you're working on an idea. Is this really worth, you know, is it worth me trying to make a contribution to this area? Can I really say something new? You might not know exactly what it is that you're going to say yet. You need to get in there and really study it. But even from the beginning of the process, you want to know that this is a really important topic, you know, and I'll talk about some of the papers and some of the special issues that we've had that I think really do go to those important topics. So what are some of the challenges to developing those new ideas and having that impact? One is, I think, reading only the academic literature, which is something that, you know, PhD students do a lot of. In fact, almost all of us, we do a lot of it. We read the academic literature, but we don't really pay attention to what's going on in the real world of marketing. And that's where I want to put the focus on with you today, that you can, by paying attention to the real world of marketing, you can actually come up with better ideas. And what I'm going to do throughout this first talk is give you a set of tips for how you might use the real world of marketing to come up with better ideas. So let me start with a story, though, to further motivate this topic, which this is also a story I heard when I was a PhD student. Some of you have probably heard it called the streetlight effect. There's various names for it. I call it the parable of the lamppost. And in this parable, I observe a colleague searching by a lamppost, which is one of these things that you might see like in a park or outside somebody's house. And the colleague reports, "I've lost my keys." So I offer to help, and we search together. And after about an hour, my colleague admits that he actually lost his keys walking to the parking lot, not under the lamp. And stunned, I asked, "Well, why are you then searching under the lamp?" And he answers, "Well, this is where there's light." And the point in this story is really that the literature is kind of like that light. We tend to look to the literature because it's where other people have already written about the topic. But remember, if you're only looking at the literature, you're only going to be exposed to what other people have already said. And you do need to know what other people have said, but you really shouldn't stop there, in my opinion. So reading the literature will ensure that you're working in these well-lit areas, but it's gonna to some degree limit your ability to uncover truly novel ideas. And so, in fact, many people, you can decide for yourself how you think is important to do this, but some people actually don't read the literature until they first go and study what's happening in the real world, like talk to consumers or talk to managers or read the popular press on a particular topic, because then you can really approach that real world with without any knowledge of how the literature has thought about it. Because otherwise that, what other people have said will kind of keep interfering with your ability to see something perhaps novel in what's going on in the real world. So whether you start with the real world or start with the literature, the idea is that you want to pulse between the two of those to really maximize your opportunity to come up with an interesting idea. So you can focus on any marketing stakeholder that's operating in the real world. I've listed some of these here. It could be that you talk to consumers, or you look at the overall firm or company. You could look at the specific marketing manager, say you're interested in something related to social media. You could focus on a marketer that's working in the social media area. Or if you're interested in things like privacy, maybe you want to look at that from a policy perspective or from the perspective of other societal stakeholders, like, who are interested in developing regulations or guidelines for privacy. And of course, you could study an overall market, because markets are a big sort of area, level of analysis where a lot of marketing occurs. We want markets to function effectively. It's better for consumers if they're competitive and innovative, but there's a lot of reasons why markets or industries sometimes can become less competitive and less innovative, which hurts both marketing and consumers. So the point here is that you can focus on any of these stakeholders. So what can you learn by engaging in the real world of marketing? I'm going to talk about three sort of topics within this broader area of the real world of marketing. I'm just going to bring up a way that you can think about just coming up with a novel problem, a novel question, like a broad area to work in. The second is more about a specific relationship or explanation that you might come up with. And then third, just thinking about context and offer you some examples that might spark some new ideas. So let's start with this idea of the novel problem. And so here the suggestion is going to be that you really take the time to look at what these stakeholders that we talked about, any of those on that prior slide, are saying about where marketers are struggling. And there's a lot of these kinds of documents that are on the web or that are associations put out. This was one that was put out by the American Marketing Association. And what you can see here is they spend some time trying to identify what they call the 7 big marketing problems. And many of these are really pretty important for what's going on with marketing. We still don't have very good answers to all these questions. But the point is that you could then, if you wanted to see, for example, think about growth, which is the first point there. This could give you a sense that, yeah, if I write about this, this is something that marketers actually do care quite a bit about, because this organization spent a lot of time trying to understand from its members what was important to them. Same thing is something called the Marketing Science Institute, which if you haven't heard about it, it's msi.org. What they do every couple of years is they publish a set of research priorities. And those research priorities are usually organized into a couple of themes. So this is 5 themes that you can see. And then within those themes, there's different topics, but they go through a process of actually working with practitioners to understand what these priorities that they have are as marketers. And then they offer funding to scholars, including PhD students, to do research on these topics. And you can see there's some overlap, like here's capturing information to fuel growth. We saw growth was the #1 point on the prior slide. And they have some specific quotes and specific directions that you could take. But the point is that you can really get a handle on what's important to these marketers by studying these kinds of initiatives. I think this is the prior. This isn't the most recent, but some of them do overlap from the list that I have here. And in fact, the Journal of Marketing published a special issue that was called the JM/MSI special issue, where what we did was we took those priorities that you saw listed on the prior page, and we asked teams of what were called the MSI scholars. These were sort of mid-range people. They're not the young scholars, if some of you know the difference between the scholars and the young scholars. These are sort of mid-range people. We asked them to write research agendas on each of these MSI priorities. So you can see these are some of the papers which are all up on the Journal of Marketing website. So for example, if you wanted to look at the customer journey from a social perspective, this first paper looks at that. The idea of marketing agility, which is a pretty novel idea. You see practitioners talking about it very much, but the truth is we still don't know that much about it. These authors sought to try to do that. And each of the other topics, the inefficiencies of digital advertising markets, which is just fascinating. All of these papers are fascinating. So if you're interested in a particular topic, these papers would also be really good because they would tell you what's going on in that particular area, for example, around customers and artificial intelligence. And the same thing here are the 3 other papers that were in that special issue. You can see that capturing marketing information to fuel growth. There was also a set of commentaries from actual marketing stakeholders. So 15 of them that you can see listed there in that blue box, which is also nice because you hear from the voice of the marketer what they think is important. And so, these are just examples though of starting with the research, starting with a real problem in the world, and then working on trying to get some solution. This paper here, for example, on omnichannel looks at things like privacy, it looks at blockchain, some of the issues that are really on the cutting edge of dealing with informational challenges in that part of the field. There's also a bunch of other kinds of lists. Here's one from a not from an association, but from a company called HubSpot, which most of you have probably heard of. But you can see the problems that they identify. And these are all problems, frankly, that we still need to do more work on. Like, well, how is it that companies actually secure top talent? I mean, it seems like it's a really important problem for marketing organizations. We don't know that much about that. Why do some companies win those battles and others don't? Here's another example from a brand perspective. And here's growth again. You can see that rearing up. You'll also see purposive brand, ensuring consumer trust. These are all things that we've seen really become even more important over the last year. And no one of these is more important than the others. But the point is that you can look at these kinds of materials that you might find on the web to try to identify what you think might be an important topic to study. You could also look at what other scholars say. So Poonam Keller, who's a marketing scholar that works in the area of health, she gave her Association for Consumer Research presidential address years ago, and she wrote about these 4 research areas. And you can see that these are really important topics, like when is materialism helpful or hurtful? We tend to think about it as hurtful, but in fact, it probably could. From what Joe Klein does in her work, is she finds out it's actually helpful in some cases. And then here's another one on legal. So the point is that, and societal. So these are all areas that you could look at. And we've seen a lot more work, for example, in the last year on political activism for brands. And so these are all topics that are really front and center that would be a good place to start a project. So once you've got this area, let's say it's something like, looking at, using, developing high growth opportunities for helping marketers identify high growth opportunities for their strategies. Then what you want to do is you want to map out all of the existing knowledge. So this is where you do want to look at the literature and map sort of what we know, and map that specifically to your real world observation, so that you can see, has the existing knowledge already dealt with this problem very effectively, or is there some opportunity, some white space, so to speak, that would allow me to really, contribute here? So the overlap between these, suggests that there may be some work in the area, but what you're looking for is that bigger white space, in this case, pink, that where new knowledge really does need to be developed. So the existing knowledge isn't answering the problem. So you have an opportunity there. And so this is a really important slide to make sure that you don't waste your time working on a topic where, the existing knowledge has already solved the problem. Okay, so let me give you an example of this that was published in the Journal of Marketing, which was it started with this real world observation. Which was that, and I don't know what these numbers are like in Brazil. My guess is that, because this project was done in the 1990s, so I don't know if the rates are the same or higher or lower, but in this period, there was a 35% rate of smoking among high school students. And it was quoted in the literature as a pediatric, which is young person, epidemic. And smoking in films was on the rise. 80% of films showed smoking, and it made the people that were smoking look youthful and vigorous and be good looking. And you can see some of these images over here of Uma Thurman and Scarlett Johansson. So what these scholars did was they looked in the literature and they found there was no research that was linking smoking scenes in films to adolescent smoking. You know, like if adolescents saw these films, which of course they were in many cases, would that contribute to their interest in smoking, for example? So they found that there was an opportunity here. And so what these scholars did, that you can see listed here, Connie Peshman and her PhD student, Qiang-Feng Shi, what they did was they actually took a film and they worked with film editors to create a smoking and a non-smoking version of an actual movie. And I think it was this one down here with, gosh, I can't remember her name now. You probably have seen her in this recent TV show called Stranger Things. Anyway, she probably looks familiar. And what they did was they literally took the cigarette out of her fingers in one version, and in another version, they put one in. And they did a field experiment that they set up at local schools. And their findings actually supported the idea that there was some kind of positive arousal that increased the liking of these tobacco products. And they also showed, this last bullet's important, they showed that showing a 30-second anti-smoking spot that depicted smoking as negative before the movie made that go away. So it nullified that positive reaction. So they understood the problem, but then they also offered a solution. So I think this is a great example of using a real world observation to come up with a research idea and then seeing it through. So here's a tip for you, in addition to doing the mapping, is often what you'll see, even with many of the lists that I showed you earlier, you'll see a very specific question that's being asked by practitioners or policymakers. Even consumers might be asking a very specific question. But usually what we're looking for as academics is we're looking for a more general version of that question. So for example, these are a set of quotes that I pulled from the literature on why Apple is a great marketer, what makes a great marketer today, what separates a good marketer from a great one. I mean, these are all, you know, pretty specific questions. So the idea here is that the broader research question may be something like this: what is marketing excellence and how do we foster it? Which again, you can see that it's connected to these points, but it's formed more as a more general research question. So this is a paper that I wrote that tries to answer that question from an organizational perspective. And there's another paper that we wrote by Christian, or not that we wrote, but that we just published in the Journal of Marketing. I need to put it into this presentation, that Christian Hamburg published on marketing excellence. So if you're interested in this topic, you could look at both of these papers for some insights. So let's do a practice session with all of you and see if I can get you into the swing of things on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some pictures, and then what I'd like to have you do is think about what general question is emerging from these observations. All of these are from the real world. They all came from the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, things that I was reading. So the first one was an article that was entitled "Too Many, Too Big Homes." So wait until I show you all these before you start offering research questions. So too many, too big homes. The second data point was from the New York Times, and it said, how much food do we waste? Probably more than you think was the answer to that question. And then just on a website, somebody asked, you know, do I have too many clothes? And then a commentary saying too big. So when you look at these questions or look at these data points, what kinds of research questions come out of your in your thinking about these points? And I see a few other questions up here too that I could answer. And you can just, if you want, you can type whatever question you think might be applied to all of these data points, how you could form a research question from these observations. And maybe while you're thinking about that, I'll just answer Paolo's question about high impact journals. So I would say really you want to be focusing on those, the premier journals, if you want to get into that way of thinking. So that would be the Journal of Marketing Research, Journal of Consumer Research, Marketing Science, depending on, your interests. And then there's, the Journal of Consumer Psychology would be more of a specialty journal on the consumer psychology side. And there's other journals too that are good impact as well, like International Journal of Research and Marketing. But I would say, focusing on the top 4 or 5 that I mentioned would really be your best strategy. So I hope that helps, Paolo. A different Paolo is asking a question about concerning the real world. Don't we get too constrained or limited to indigenous marketing constructs when it comes to the development of new theories or theoretical advances? In this sense, are the units that comprise viable alternative? So it's a good question, Paolo. The point is that what's going on in the real world is not likely going to be the basis of your theory. You're going to have to come up a level, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. You're not going to necessarily be focused on exactly what is being said about it in the real world. So in order to study, for example, how is it that marketers, what inhibits marketers from seeing high impact or high growth opportunities in their markets? Well, if you came up with that question, you could study that from a cognitive psychology perspective. You could study that you could look at that in terms of the organizational problems of trying to get at that. So the answer is rarely going to be in the real world. Sometimes it is. I've had sometimes practitioners actually tell me something that I used as the basis of a paper, but it's more often that you have to then go back into the literature and look for ideas and solutions to address that problem or question. So let me show you what I came up with on these for these particular points that I just showed you. So if I were looking across all these data points, the things that I think would be most interesting to study here would be, why do consumers overestimate their needs? Because you can see that's a pretty consistent theme of all of these data points. People put too much on their plate. They buy homes that are too big for themselves. Why is it that we overestimate our needs? And then maybe even more importantly, how can we help consumers make more accurate estimations of their needs? If you could answer this question, you could have a really big impact, because think about what this would mean for sustainability. I don't think we have a very good set of answers to these questions. And going back to Paolo's question, you can see that my questions are, they are being derived from these empirical observations about cars and homes and foods, but they're not trapped by those points. I'm definitely abstracted up a level. So I hope that also makes the point that, that I've tried to make. So hopefully that's helpful, so you can see about asking a more general version of a specific question that's being asked by others. And it may be like a news commentator is asking the question, or an editorial in the New York Times is asking this. Okay, so if you were to do this, what if I had you in class with me, what I might ask you to do is go through an exercise like this, where you go and you read about or listen to or interview any marketing stakeholder that's engaged with the real world of marketing, and try to identify an important and interesting problem or question that has not been addressed in research. And that doesn't have to be in consumer behavior. That was from something else I was doing. It can be across any aspect, firm behavior, consumer behavior, the behavior of markets, doesn't matter. And so there again, you're trying to take something that you've seen and then go back to the literature and see, how has this been dealt with, and where is the opportunity, if at all? There may not be, but it's worthy taking a look. Okay, so let's look now at some of these novel relationships and explanations that you might come up with, because up to this point we've been kind of talking about coming up with the general problem area more than anything. So one of the things that we want to try to do is we can work on identifying real world examples that challenge what we see in the literature. So I'll just give you an example of this. There was a very early on, before most of you were born, I'm sure, there was a set of research studies that was done on something called the PIMS database, the Profit Impact of Marketing Strategy. And one of the questions, pretty important question that came out of that data was the question of, does product quality actually affect market share? And so, it's a good question. They had their own answers to that, but what you could do in this case is you can actually, what these authors did was they actually flipped the question around. So instead of asking if product quality affects market share, in fact, they asked, does market share affect perceptions of product quality? And this is a Journal of Marketing paper that was published by Linda Helloff and Bob Jacobson. And I use it as an example here because I want you to be able to see how you can take the existing ideas in the literature. And in this case, you're not really challenging it, you're just flipping it completely. You're making the independent variable the dependent variable and vice versa. So that's one way that you can think about it. Maybe the causality is completely the opposite, and that's important to think about. The other way to think about this is to think about these managerial beliefs that are held in the real world. And a very famous practitioner that most of you have probably heard about, Jack Welch, who is the CEO of General Electric for 20 years. He had this famous declaration that they would often write about, like in the Harvard Business Review, that, well, GE is only going to stay in markets where it holds the #1 or #2 market share. And so what these scholars did, Alexander Edling and Alexander Himmel, both Germans, they actually did a meta-analysis of all the research that had been done on the relationship between market share and profits. And in fact, this was the second such meta-analysis that was done. A meta-analysis takes all of the published research in an area and looks for the broader trends. And so that's what these guys did. And in fact, you can see from the title that it's not necessarily the case that being #1 is the best path to profitability. So, taking this, real world belief that a lot of consultants and a lot of marketers were ascribing to and saying, hey, wait a minute, maybe this isn't true. Let's actually look at the evidence, was a really nice contribution that these guys had to the literature. The other thing you can do is you can develop theory to reconcile counterintuitive or contradictory real world findings. So here's one finding. I'm going to give you two findings, and I'd love to have you go ahead and tell me what you think is going on. Oh, I see some other comments here. I missed these when I didn't scroll down. So I see some of you pointing to some explanations here. So let's try this again, and I'll make sure that I scroll down. Here's one finding, and this is actually from the CMO survey that I run. And what this shows is the marketing budgets, what percent of marketing budgets are spent on social media. So I forget, this was about a year ago, it was about 11.4%. And you can see it's expected to go up in a year and then in 5 years by quite a bit. So spending is definitely on the rise. But in that same survey, we asked people to tell us, well, how well does social media contribute to your company's performance? And what you can see is that, and I've asked this for many, many years on multiple occasions, the number just isn't changing. So you've got this kind of weird combination of findings. spending is going up, contributions to performance are flat. Why? What's going on there? What's your explanation for that? Why do you think that that's happening? Tell me what you think. What could be causing marketers to continue to spend on social media, even though they're not really getting, they're reporting it's not affecting their performance anymore over time? Any thoughts on that one? Well, one explanation might be that they're really terrible at measuring that performance impact, right? So if you know, maybe they are getting a performance impact, but they're just not very confident that they're measuring it accurately. So they keep spending because they think they might be getting it, but they can't really measure it very well. The other thing is that maybe they're worried that if they stop spending and their competitors keep spending a lot, they'll be left in the dust, meaning they'll be left behind. So they could be spending just on the idea that it would help them. They think it'll help them kind of stay up with the competition, but they don't really think they're getting much by way of a direct performance advantage from that spending. So there could be other reasons as well, some rational, some irrational. You know, there's a lot of ways that you could try to explain this, but sometimes what we see in the real world is we see these kinds of contradictions. And then you could think about, well, you know, is it interesting to document this kind of irrationality that people are spending even when they don't get a performance impact? And could I improve marketers' decisions in this area if I were to be able to document this and show that they're spending when they probably shouldn't, or that they need to improve their measures, or whatever your solution happens to be? Okay, so the idea is to look for those counterintuitive or contradictory real world findings, but you do have to think about it and think about how you would explain that. And that's actually the harder part. The other way, another tip for you here is to transfer questions or theory from one context to another. And you can also do this with theory. My very first paper, the idea for it came from education, the education literature. So I saw people doing something over there, and I was able to transfer those theories to study a marketing problem. It's the same thing with transferring either the question or theory from one real world context to another. So as an example, I'll tell you the story of, this is an actual research project that I was involved with. I was listening to a podcast. I do some work in the area of health, and I was listening to this podcast by this epidemiologist, and she had just finished her PhD. Her name is Kelly Turner, as you can see, and she wrote a book called Radical Remission. And in that book, she documents all of these people who were basically told by their doctors that they would die from cancer, but they didn't. And she makes the case in this podcast that it's important to study these exceptions. She said, you know, that in a lot of medical research, we tend to sort of study the averages, you know, like on average, how long do people live? On average, when do people die from this type of cancer or that type of cancer? And if you've ever looked these things up online, that's exactly the sort of mentality. No one says, well, you know, what about the exceptions? And so that's what I was working on a project, and I heard this podcast, and it made me think about how I could use this way of thinking about exceptions and studying exceptions in my own work, which was that I had this Journal of Marketing research paper with Simona Wies, in which was part of her dissertation. And what we documented here was that when firms go public, they tend to kind of drop off in the level of breakthrough innovations after that. So if you look at, you know, the going public year is the 0 year here. After the firm goes public, that number drops off considerably. And the explanation in the paper is that, and in a lot of other literature that also finds this, is that, you know, there's a lot of pressure put on the firm by the stock market to reduce risk. And one way that the firm does that is by reducing the number of breakthrough innovations that it has. And so that's what we studied in the JMR paper, this tendency, this sort of negative tendency, just like the people that died from cancer, we were studying all of these firms that dropped off. But in fact, the truth is that, or if you think about it, not all firms, or what we discovered was that not all firms actually were doing this. In fact, only about 65% of firms were dropping off in that way. Another 35% were doing just fine. So what we, kind of plotting it this way, you can think about this red line were the firms dropping off, but there were another set of firms that just kept doing whatever they were doing before the IPO. And then there was another set of firms that kind of accelerated. They took all the money they made from the IPO and they did even more breakthrough innovation. And so what we did in a paper that we've just finished revising for the journal, for a journal, which is we documented, well, what happens in the case of these blue and green lines? Why do these firms do a lot better than these firms that fall off in the red line? So that was very cool to be able to take that idea of the exceptions and kind of going deep into looking at, well, what distinguishes those firms and developing some predictions about what might make them different. So if I had you in class, the same thing I would do is I would say, look at some contradictory marketing or consumer research ideas, and then describe that contradiction, and then point to a novel explanation. Why is it that this exists? And you could do that across any of these areas. I just picked off the contradiction as one thing that I think is pretty easy to do. Okay. So let me go through a few more points and then we'll see how we're doing in terms of broader questions. So one of the things that you have to be really careful of as a scholar is that there will be forces of what are called in the literature confirmation bias, which means that you have a tendency to sort of see what you expect. So you have a tendency to confirm what you expect. And so it's hard. It's hard often as a result to see if there's, when there is something new, your mind just misses it. And so it's important to really work to challenge those forces. So again, this confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, and recall information that supports our beliefs. And so here's just a few tips for you, which is try to keep an open mind when you're out there scouting around in the real world. Adopt what, in some of the mindfulness traditions, they call a beginner's mind, which means that a very childlike approach, like, just explore what's out there instead of judging it quickly as good or bad, or, oh, that's a psychology problem. Really try to figure out what it is. Sample alternative evidence to sort of see what's out there. And then the other thing is you can try different metaphors on. Metaphors can be really, really helpful in trying to uncover some new insights. So I'm going to give you a few examples of this issue of the metaphors. So here's an example of some of the sort of traditional marketing metaphors: the consumer as a target, consumer as an acquirer, an owner, consumers as a source of insight. But what if you thought about consumers as the following? What if you thought about them as a skeptic? If you thought about them as a co-producer, which research is doing these days? What if you thought about them as a tribe member? And what if you thought about the consumer as a subversive agent, that was actually trying to hurt the firm? What would that look like? So I'll give you an example. This is a nice paper that was very early on in my tenure as an editor that I handled by Colin Campbell and Hope Scow. And what they did was they looked at deal collectives. These are these online collectives where people share all kinds of information about promotions, and people stack deals, and they really try to take advantage of companies. So you can see these quotes. I I like things where you're taking advantage of a big company like Amazon and making them send you something for ridiculously cheap. Like if there's an error, for example, these collectives would share it. I'm sure Amazon didn't intend for this to happen, but it feels like I've gotten one over on them. It feels better. And the whole paper is about how these deal collectives operate and also what marketers might be able to do with that. Let me just see, I saw a couple questions come up here. So Fernando, I don't know what Tontera is. That might be a word attributed, Tontera changing, maybe the company changing the risk profile. Go ahead and look at that paper. We took a lot of care in that paper to rule out all kinds of competing explanations. In fact, we show that when firms go from being public back to being private, the whole effect reverses, which is what you would expect. If it's really the stock market that's causing this, when you go from private to public, it should happen. But when you go from public back to private, the effect should reverse, and it does. So take a look at that and see if that's also convincing to you. Okay, and here's some other metaphors that you could, I do a lot of work on organizations. So think about, well, what if you studied the organization as a psychic prison? Wow, that's an interesting way to think about, how maybe why marketers don't see high growth opportunities, or the organization as a political system where people are trying to have influence and maybe not necessarily work to help the company make money. So when you adopt those metaphors, you really start to get a different view of what might be going on within companies, right? So these metaphors, the idea is to shake things up, to get you to think differently about a particular topic. Not that all of them will be useful, but some of them probably will be. Okay, so what you really want to do here is you want to take whatever that real world observation is, okay, and work to then translate that into a research idea. So a big tip here, and this is often where junior faculty and students fail, is they simply describe what's in the real world and they stop there. So for research in top journals, you're going to have to go beyond that description of reality, okay? And what you need to do here is to go through a translation process. And there's a lot of ways that this can occur. Not all of these have to occur. But for example, you could identify what is happening. So new concepts and new relationships. So it's not just enough that, you say, in this company, something is happening, but what's the higher order, the more abstract version of that story that you can tell? And also, why is something happening? Why does the firm do this thing? Why does the consumer do this thing? What's going on? Also, when? What are some of the conditions? We call those boundary conditions. When this occurs, when it doesn't occur. And you might ask why. You might ask why. Well, I'm sorry, not why, but how. Well, how is it that, what's the process that's unfolding? What's the mechanism by which things are happening? So some people might put that with the why, but I would say the why can also just be an explanation. But sometimes how and why are pretty similar. And then you can also adopt an evaluation in your study. You could say, I'm going to try to show that this is a harmful practice, that this hurts society, that it hurts consumers. So that's something that a posture you could adopt as well. So all of these are great ways to try to build a contribution. But your goal here is to bring the theory and the real world together. So what changes in the current thinking, and you could take the word theory out there, what changes in current thinking are necessary to accommodate what you see happening in the real world? Maybe you need another variable in there. Maybe you need a different dependent variable in there. What new theories are necessary? that you might need to invent to address this question or topic in the real world. And that's what we do. We come up with new ideas. Like in that paper where we saw the drop-off, we developed a theory about imprinting, that some early activities that occurred in the life of the firm were really important to the firm's ability to sustain breakthrough innovation even after it went public. That's not the only reason, probably, but that we thought that was an important one that we were able to document. And don't forget to think about the invention of what some people call, Roland Rust and others have called, indigenous marketing theories. These are theories that they don't come from psychology or sociology or economics. They're really marketing theories. Theories like service quality or market orientation, things I mentioned earlier, the service dominant logic. There are a lot of them, and you can come up with those on your own. And you can have a big impact in the field when you do that. Okay, so one thing that's really important, remember at the very beginning we said you don't want your ideas to be too obvious. So what we want to make sure is that your new relationship, your new idea passes what my colleague Rick Stalin here at Duke calls the SMART MBA test. And so what's the SMART MBA test? The test is, if you ask your SMART MBA students to answer your research question, will they produce your answer? In other words, will they know the answer already? They already know the answer. That might give you a sense that you need to go further, that there's not as much of a contribution to answering the question in this way. So that would mean it's a little bit too obvious, for example. So what you're looking for, you would ideally look for tension or disagreement. Some people say yes, some people say no, some people, and maybe, there's a big argument that breaks out in the class, which is really an exciting moment. Then oh, I'm onto something, because there's not a very clear and simple answer here. I have some disagreement. Also, if you observe ignorance, where people say, I have no idea, I don't know the answer to that, that means you're probably also onto something. So the idea here is to, at the beginning and throughout the process, keep checking to make sure that your idea is contributing to the way that people are thinking about a topic, that you really are adding some value to their thinking. Otherwise, you're likely to submit your paper and people are going to say, that was too obvious, that we already knew that. That's what you want to avoid, because doing a research paper takes years. And so you want to make sure that when you when you make that investment, that you're working on something where there can be a payoff. Okay. I think what I might do is just kind of quickly go through this. I want to get to the very last set of points. So let me just talk about some contexts and examples that might spark some new ideas. So one thing that you can do is you can go deep into what some people call the institutional details. Like really go in, if you're working, say you're observing a company, really study the details of what's going on, because those institutional details might have some surprising qualities to them. So this is a project that Mike Ahern, it's actually not a working paper, they published, I think, in the Journal of Marketing Research. They observed that many sales organizations, in fact, have a two-stage selling process. On the one hand, here on the far left, there's a front-end part of the process where they negotiate the price. And then on the back end, there's where they negotiate the price of after-sales services. So those would be like, coming in to get your car fixed. So one is the price of the product, and then the other is the after-sales product, after-sales services. So what they found was that when the buyer has access to price information online, the most important thing that the company does is to be very, very honest about the price. So not try to, tell people, well, we've got the lowest price when we don't, just to be very honest about the truth. And what that does, as you can see here in the middle, is that fosters a sense of trust in the salesperson and in that organization. And that trust in turn actually makes it, that weakens the buyer's sort of vigilance, if you will, in the final stage of the process. So they end up paying a little bit more for these after sales services. So the point is that by being in these dealerships, with these car dealerships, they were actually able to see these two steps going on and then try to understand, how is it that it would work well. So the institutional details can often be, interesting and important. You still have to abstract, but they can give you something to think about. The other thing is to think about real world examples that might spark research questions. So this is a bunch of points that you could find on the internet anywhere that talks about how, the internet means people have a lower attention span, which is a big deal. You can see some of the statistics here that in just 15 years, it's dropped from 12 to 8 seconds in terms of and this is 2015, so it's probably even smaller now. The point is that marketers want consumers to pay attention to their videos. And so in this paper, so that is the marketing challenge. And in particular, what these authors did was they wanted the viewers to watch an entire video, and that could be an ad, that could be a TV show, but they were not able to use full-length trailers to sort of convince people to go forward. So what they did in this paper, which we published in the Journal of Marketing that you can see cited here, was they developed a technique for the making of video clips. So they were able to take a longer video and edit that down using facial recognition software to about 10 seconds. And they looked at the real-time emotional responses to figure out what should be in the trailer and what should not be in the trailer. And what they found was that when they optimized the video clips in this way, they were able to, you can see the lab study findings and also a big field study that they did with Netflix. They improved all of the outcomes: intention to watch the full movie, expectations regarding box office revenues. The actual streaming measures improved even by 10 to 13%. So this is a really interesting and important marketer problem that they used very neat methods to try to offer some insights around. And here's another example of taking a marketplace observation and turning it into a research question. So the observation in this case was all of this discussion in the literature about the value of the CMO, which I thought about a little bit with the CMO survey as well. But does the CMO really add value? And so what that led to is you can think about the general research question is, do marketing leaders actually add value to companies? And we've had a bunch of papers that have, in this case, all three of them were published in the Journal of Marketing over the last 5 years or 6 years that try to answer that question. So the point is that these authors were really motivated by what they saw going on in the real world. Okay, so I'll leave that. That would just be an exercise that you could do if I was with you. We'll skip that. So let me just finish with a few practices for engaging with the real world of marketing. One is that I would encourage you to read and scan as broadly as you can. So that might mean reading across the field of marketing. So even if you're a consumer researcher, go ahead and skim the tables of contents for the modeling journals. Read across different disciplines, because like the psychology literature might be helpful if you're a consumer researcher. The organizational literature might be helpful if you're a strategy person, etc. So I think also reading the future research directions of papers, because the authors often will throw a bunch of ideas in there for you as readers to help you think about this part of the field, because they really want you to work in the area. The other thing is look at those special issues. Look at any special issue that's been published by the journal, because this will also give you some ideas for research. Go to conferences. I know you can't do it now, none of us can, but when you can, come to the journal, come to the conferences and talk to people about their research. And read about marketing stakeholders. This goes exactly to what we were talking about earlier. there's many, many things out there. And I skim through a lot of things myself because I'm always looking for new topics. Just, you know, print out, keep a folder of different things you find interesting, or a notebook of different ideas that you have. The second point's important. So focus on thought leaders and reflect on where they point. You know, what they say is important and what they say, but it's really important to remember that they may be wrong. Like Jack Welch was wrong when he said, you know, that the only way for GE to do well was to be number one or number two. That's not correct, at least in general. It may have been correct for General Electric. The other thing is look for extremes. Try to explain and understand what's going on. Why is it that some people are over here and some people are over there in their thinking? See what you can come up with. And then talk to marketing stakeholders, and you can get connections through your school, through your family, your friends, anybody you know. Talk to them about your problems, and tell them you're interested in what they think. Most people would be happy to give you 20 minutes of their time. And then you can use these bridge organizations like MSI or the AMA to help you with that. And I do a lot of things where I reach out to people on LinkedIn when I want to talk to them about a problem I'm having with, a thought that I'm having. You can do the same thing. Let me skip that. And then use your classrooms as learning labs to improve your ideas. Ask your research questions. See how you do on that SMART MBA test. See if you generate a lot of discussions among the students. And venture out of your silo. I put down some of the silos that we tend to have. So it's never a good idea to only talk to people in your own school or in your own area. It's really good to get that breath, especially at the beginning when you're trying to figure out what you want to do. It's also good to just have different routines to try to sort of shake up your head to see different things, like maybe, one afternoon a month, you read through all of the tables of contents of some of the journals you're interested in, or you look through the last few weeks of the Wall Street Journal or whatever it happens to be. So I think there are a number of benefits of having this deep focus on the real world of marketing. And I would love to take any questions that you have, and we'll see if if there aren't any. I have some other topics I can cover, but I would be happy to take a few minutes here now to address any questions that you have.
Okay, Professor Christine, thank you. Thank you very much for your speech, for sharing with us. It was really great. I really appreciate it, and I know that the whole division would like to say the same. I got here some questions from the Q&A. I saw that you answered some, but I would like to share new ones that received. I saw here that Professor Prado, he said that he thanked you for the insightful speech, and he said that you had an exciting initiative about the about the CMO survey. Mm-hmm. He would like to know if it's interesting to have some insights for research from these practitioners. So do you think that this initiative could be replicated in different countries? Yes,
I do think it can be. We just launched it in the UK, for example, and I have a patent to our trademark to do it in China. So it's just a matter of having the right partner. And
all right.
So definitely, I mean, I think anybody who's interested in the CMO survey, that does show a lot of things that are going on in the in the real world of marketing. So I would encourage anybody who's interested in that to go ahead and to look at cmosurvey.org, because that will have many of the topics that are really important to marketers. I'm not sharing anymore, am I? Am I sharing anymore?
No, you're not sharing anymore. It's okay, it's all right, great. I have another question here from Professor Fernando Lucy, that he asked you that if product centricity and customer centricity, if they are substitutes or they can be considered synergetically connected.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that, we tend to think about them as, if you're focused on the product, that you're not necessarily focused on the customer. But it's not by definition true. I think I mean, the whole reason that the idea of customer centricity developed was that companies were, focused more on their technologies and their products, and they lost sight. Let's say consumer needs shifted, but they were still set on trying to sell them, a particular product, that they didn't really update what they were learning about those customers. So I would say customer centricity is probably the key, but then you do have to develop offerings that serve those needs. So you do need both. It's just a matter of, I think, companies losing touch with their customers, and also being afraid to cannibalize. Cannibalization is a big problem for many companies. Their customers are shifting, but they don't want to cannibalize their existing offerings. And so then that keeps them out of innovating when customers really do want new products. So I hope that answers.
Okay, yeah, good. I have another one here. Ricardo, he said that what's happening with brand valuation research? Are they still important, or interest migrate to other marketing metrics?
Mm-hmm. So this would be like the brand asset evaluator, the Young and Rubicam work, and others. I think that in fact, I have a paper right now that we have under review at the Journal of Marketing Research that looks at brands, and we use some of that data. So I think that data is alive and well. The question is, what can you do with it that's novel and interesting? Because what people have already done is they've shown that those metrics affect firm value. So firms with higher brands, there's some impact ultimately on the value of the company. So the question is, what can you do? In our case, what we do is we look at the impact of the brand on labor markets. So the company's ability to attract employees and ultimately what they pay those employees. So we have a theory about how the different types of brand metrics affect those outcomes, which is relatively novel in that literature. There's been a little bit of work on employee-based brand equity, which we try to extend with this paper.
Okay, great. And Walter, let me ask you, did you see something in the chat? Because I was looking at the Q&A. If you take a look at some questions to Professor Moorman.
Well, I see a question here from Alexander about the theories and use approach. So thank you for bringing that point up. So when I mentioned about the indigenous theories, so what this article does is Valerie Zeithamel, Bernie Jaworski, Ajay Kohli, Kapil Tuli, Wolfgang Ulaga, what they do is they show researchers how to use the theories and use approach, which is meaning what you do with the theories and use approach is you say, we don't really know that much about this topic, so let's actually go to the stakeholder. In their case, it's often the manager, but it could be the consumer, and listen to what they think about this topic. And we'll try to formalize that into a theory. And so that's why it's called theory in use, because it's the theory that the stakeholder is using to guide their behavior. And so they offer a very nice set of tools to scholars interested in developing a theory in use. And these are all the scholars that did service quality and market orientation, Valerie and all of the others. And I mentioned that marketing agility paper earlier. They use the theories and use approach to come up with a theory about marketing agility.
Let me ask you something. Something that I take a note here. It's more general, not related to you, but when you said about the relevance, about the importance of our research for the impact, don't you think that most of what is important in the top journals or in general journals as well is related about the editor experience and interest? Even because sometimes it's some kind of strategy, because some editors, they have some strategy related to some idea that you would like to improve the impact of the journal. I'm not talking about Journal of Marketing, maybe that they already are in the top 3, top 5 journals, but in other journals that sometimes you can submit something that is relevant, but it's not the way that the editor wants. And continue the same question, sometimes also not around all people, but some reviewers evaluate what they would like to see and not what the authors did. So sometimes they are looking for something, oh, I would like, so you have to do that. And they are not really evaluating the author research. What do you think about this? What you have to do?
Yeah, so that's possible. I think the most important thing for if you're interested in publishing in a journal, one very important step is to study the editorial mission of that journal. So on the Journal of Marketing website, which I'll show you in a little bit, we state that these are the kinds of papers the topics we're interested in. This is what the journal stands for. And so look at the editorial mission, which is usually stated, then look at the kinds of papers that are being published in that journal, which is really important. That'll tell you, these are the types of papers that are being accepted. I would say in most of the top journals, there's not, the editors don't usually bring, unless it's for a special issue, they don't usually bring a particular focus. But maybe in lower level journals, they do. But I would say in the top journals, that's not the case. It's more that, that, for example, at Marketing Science, they want those papers to have some level of sophistication that you might not want, say, at the Journal of Consumer Research. So I think it's more those differences. But I think the key thing is look at the papers that are published and then look at the editorial statement and the recent editorials that have been published by those editors, because I think that will reveal quite a lot.
That's a good strategy for the authors to submit.
It is, because you also want to be citing those papers. Because let's say you're writing a paper on service quality and the Journal of Marketing published 2 or 3 papers over the last year on service quality, and you submit your paper without citing those papers, it makes you look like you're not really in touch with what's going on, right? And also you want to be contrasting your paper to those papers to say, these authors said this and these authors said that, and I'm going to say something different than that. I'm going to contribute beyond that. That's really important because frankly, who's going to likely be your reviewers? Those authors, right? Because they're the ones that are publishing in that area. And so the editor will likely go back to them because the editor doesn't want to publish anything derivative. So they're going, if the recent authors can look at it and say, yeah, this is new, it's different than what we've done, that's really what the editor is looking for. And the other thing is that there is a sort of check and balance process in the review process. Ultimately, the editor makes the decision. But remember, you usually have an editor. At the Journal of Marketing, we have an editor, we have an associate editor, and we have 3 reviewers. And we use all of that input to make our decisions. And I would say it's not common to overturn a whole team. So if the whole team is going in one direction, I mean, it happens, but I would say it's mostly because the editor has some kind of inside, they may know that there's other papers in the process. They have other information that they know there's a different paper that's actually stronger than this on the same topic that they think they should publish instead. So should I talk a little bit about the Journal of Marketing?
Okay, yep.
Do that, and then please ask some additional questions as we go through.
I have one question here, one more that I received. Professor Alexandre Lascada, he said that, I don't know if you know the recent article published in JM, the Authorities in Use Approach to Building Marketing Theory by Valerie Zeitman and others. What is your opinion about this article to complete what you covered in your speech? Did you know this article?
Yeah, in fact, I just mentioned it earlier. You may have missed that. I answered this question already. So
Okay.
I think we're good on that. But there is a different question here from Raphael about the pattern of rejected papers. I think the pattern we see is exactly where I started my talk, which was the papers just don't make a contribution. They don't really push knowledge in the area. So that tends to be what we write in the letters, that there's not there's not anything that's really new about your paper. You know, you write about service quality, but you don't really contribute beyond what we already know about service quality. Maybe you study it among coffee growers or coffee drinkers in Brazil, but it's basically the same theory. That's not going to go at a major journal. It needs to have the core theory needs to be new or something new about it. It can't be the same point, but just applied to another area. So I would say, Raphael, that's the most common thing that we see.
Great. Okay. Okay. Can show some data from JM.
Perfect. What I'd like to do here is if I can get, let's see. For some reason, I don't see I think I have too many screens open. So let me pull this up and I can't find where I'm sharing. Where's my sharing function? I don't know where it is. What am I doing with that? Let me close the chat tab. Oh, I see where it is now. Okay, sorry about that.
Not working, or did you find the way?
Yeah.
I heard something, but it did not appear.
Yeah, let's see. How's
Okay,
that?
perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So what I'd like to do here is just share with you some of the things that are going on at the Journal of Marketing, how you can get involved, and I'll share some of the metrics with you at the very end. So these are all of my co-editors. So you can see this is a very diverse group, covers really all parts of the field. What I want to do in this short talk is talk a little bit about our mission and principles, and then some of these initiatives around knowledge development and knowledge dissemination, and then go through some metrics with you. This is the first issue of the Journal of Marketing. I thought you might like to see that, from 1936. So the Journal of Marketing is the oldest journal in the discipline. So just to kind of keep all of this in perspective. So this is the mission statement. So I mentioned about the editorial, what the editors are saying about the journal. This is what we said, that the Journal of Marketing develops and disseminates knowledge about real-world marketing questions relevant to scholars, educators, managers, policymakers, consumers, and other societal stakeholders around the world. So many of the points that I've already talked about in the first half really dovetail nicely with this, because we put sort of the emphasis on that real world and those stakeholders that we talked about together at the beginning. So these were some of the guiding editorial principles, again, that would be helpful to you as an author, because it says basically what the journal stands for. I won't talk about these now. They're up on our website if you want to look at those, but just to know that these principles have been really important to us over time. So let me talk a little bit about some of these knowledge development initiatives, because a big part of what journals do is they develop new knowledge. They help the field develop new knowledge. So one of the things that we did, and I would love to have done one of these with all of you down in Brazil, because we've done them in other places around the world, is to have what we call a research development workshop. So maybe we can do this next year or something like that, just to come. We come for a couple of days and we bring in a bunch of editors and associate editors, and we run a series of sessions, workshop sessions. In fact, the talk that I gave you today is usually one that I do in these sessions. If you can make it to the University of Melbourne, there is going to be one there in November. So I think there are still spots open for that if you want to join.
Great.
Yeah. So I mentioned some of the special issues. We have done a lot of these as the Journal of Marketing. So this is one that I mentioned earlier about the JM MSI. I'll just go through that quickly. But we also announced, since many of you may have seen this, a special issue on better marketing for a better world. These are the 3 editors that I worked with on this special issue. And as you can see, the focus was on how do we really use marketing to improve the world. And in the end, and we published this in May, so just a few weeks ago, we ended up with 14 papers, and they were organized into 4 clusters. The first cluster was on sustainability and climate, and you can see the titles of the articles and the authors. The second was on economic and social empowerment. The third was on health and well-being. And then the fourth topic was on pro-social giving, using basically charitable giving and how marketing could help with that. So the issue turned out really nicely. And I thought I would just take 2 of these papers. So when we were talking about, really thinking about the stakeholder, and, we talked about that earlier. These are 2 of the papers that I think do this really nicely. The one on the left, it's called Buy Less, Buy Luxury. And what these authors do is they demonstrate that luxury goods are more durable. So they look in secondhand shops, they look online, and they find that luxury goods actually show up in greater amounts. But they also find that consumers tend to suffer from something that they call durability neglect. Like that how long a product lasts isn't usually something that customers pay attention to. But they show that if they can educate consumers on that point, that they actually are willing to pay more for luxury products because they know they're going to last longer. And so this is a real win-win. It's a win for the, for the environment because we have fewer products going into landfill, but it's also a win for marketers because they can charge more for these highly durable products. The second paper is a paper that actually was in South America, based in South America. The research was done in South America where they looked at the banning of the plastic grocery bag in Chile. I don't know if this has come to Brazil. Do you guys still use the real flimsy plastic bag for your grocery shopping?
Yes.
So I guess they banned that in Chile, and they just saw so much resistance. So this quote that's in the title of the paper that's called, "How do I carry all this now?" That was a quote from a customer that they interviewed in their study who, got to the checkout lane and they had nowhere to put their stuff because the government didn't set up any ways to help consumers cope with the disruption of removing that bag. So basically they're trying to help social marketers plan for better change programs to improve these practices. So those are examples of where you can think about, having a very clear stakeholder in mind for how you might, target your research later on. And if you guys are interested in this topic, we ran a webinar. It's past now, but the materials are all online. You can look at bmbw.org. There was a full hour webinar that the 4 of us ran. But if you are interested in these topics, there are 4 more webinars coming up. And I'll just put this up here. This is in June and July. We're going to take each of those 4 topics, and you can just take a picture if you want of the QR code or scan the QR code, or just go to bmbw.org. And you can register for any of these webinars where you can hear the authors talk about their research. And we're also we're working on trying to get practitioners involved in those so we can hear what the practitioner has to say about these problems. And so we'd love to have you join us for those, especially, and you don't have to say anything. If you're a brand new student, if you're just beginning in the area, you can just come and be a fly on the wall. That's okay. So we do have some other JM special issues that are in the works. One is on new technologies in marketing. This is nearly finished. Many of the papers, so if you're interested in new technology issues, we have a lot of these papers up on our website now, and I'll show you about that later. So that's another special issue that's passed, but there is one coming for people who work in the health sector area. So we decided when we weren't going to do any more special issues, and then COVID hit, and we realized, gosh, the whole healthcare sector really does need more attention from marketers. There's not enough work being done on this topic. So we decided to put forth a special issue on marketing in the healthcare sector. So would love to have you contribute. If you're interested in this topic, you can look on the JM website for, these are just some of the topics that we put out there as possibilities. But if you have something you think would be valuable, you can write to me and I can give you some feedback on whether it's a good fit for the special issue. And if you're just not sure how to think about this area, which can often happen in these new areas, is, oh, and here's the deadline. Between July 1 and November 1 is when the deadline is, when the papers will need to be submitted. But if you're, as I was starting to say, if you're interested in this topic, but you just don't have any way to think about it, I would suggest that you go up on our website and look at a session that we ran at the summer AMA last year, that where we asked all of these scholars, and the names of these folks should ring a bell with most of you if you know academic researchers here in the United States. And actually there's none from around the world. That was a mistake, but they're all talking about research in the healthcare area, just so you can kind of get a flavor of what might be possible in this area. The other thing is, if I had had time, I would have talked about in more details. We wrote an editorial in March that we called Reality Check. And what we tried to do in that editorial is go through all 5 stages of the research process and document some ways that you can bring more of the real world into every stage of the process, not just developing your idea, which we talked about, and developing your theory. We talked about really points 1 and 2, but there are a lot of other ways too. So that editorial is up on the JM website. It's available. Most of these special issue papers and editorials are open access. So you can go in there and download those and look at those as you like. And I'll show you where those are in just a second. So I think that might be interesting to all of you. The other thing we did, this is all on knowledge development front, is we hosted a couple of sessions last year on how to write an outstanding review. It's not something that we spend a lot of time on as a field, and we don't have a formal reviewer training program at the Journal of Marketing, so we wanted to provide some tools. And a copy of this webinar is available for you to review. And all of our materials are free online that you can review as you think about doing reviewing for journals. Even if you're a seasoned reviewer, I would encourage you to look at this, because you'd be surprised. There's a lot to it, and you can really make a difference in the review process if you write a good review. So here, if you go up on the Journal of Marketing website, which you can see here, ama.org/journal-of-marketing, you'll see structures that look like this. And there's 2 areas where you can find all of our papers that are currently forthcoming. There's 2 areas: articles in advance and then accepted manuscripts. One of them is newer than the other. The accepted is the brand new stuff, but the articles in advance are just a couple months old. So please feel free to look at any of those and all of those. And then the other thing is, if you're worried about your writing, and most of us are, because most of us are not very good writers, to be honest. We need support in that area. We published a paper, well, maybe it hasn't come out yet. It'll come out, I think, in July. It's all about writing with clarity. And the authors developed this tool that you see circled there called the Writing Clarity Calculator. And it allows you to run your article through this tool that tells you basically, when your article isn't very clear. We don't use it as editors. We're just making it available to authors to help them. Okay, on the knowledge dissemination front, just a few quick things. First, we use a publicity process. So when you get a paper accepted at the Journal of Marketing, you complete a series of materials, and then we use those to create a bunch of things that are really targeted to different parties, some of them to the manager, some of them to scholars. And we try to publish on a variety of places like Twitter and LinkedIn, which has really been great. We've been getting a lot of exposure for authors. We just had one of our papers was just covered in the Wall Street Journal, which was fantastic. We also publish a set of these scholarly insights, which are great for classes. So for example, if you're interested in sponsored blogging, you can go and pull up what the authors have to say about that. And this is like 2 or 3 paragraphs. It's not a full Journal of Marketing article. It's really more for students and managers. Here's an example of a press release, a Twitter post, just to give you a flavor of what we're doing, a LinkedIn post. This is one of the papers from the special issue that looks at the effect of variable compensation and on a salesperson's mental and physical health, and they find a negative effect. And we run these webinars, every couple of months. All of them are available online. We'd love for you to use those. You can use them in class. It's the authors are talking about these really interesting problems, and but you can certainly use them yourself to learn about these areas. And we have 3 webinars coming up, July and September and November. We don't have those picked yet, but you can check back at the Journal of Marketing website for all those details. And here's just to know where the webinar material is. There's a summary button at the top, but you can also look under webinars for managers, webinars for scholars. We have just different versions of these depending on the exact content we're targeting. And then, one of the things that when I took over as editor, it seemed like a real opportunity was, we're all trying to become better teachers, but we often don't use the material that's published in the journals in the classroom when it is the newest knowledge that could really benefit our students. So we developed a program called JM Insights in the Classroom, where we ask our authors to develop just 2 to 3 slides. These are really simple. They're so simple that you can just bring them right into your MBA deck. And we push the authors very hard to make sure that they're very clear. So if you're interested in, for example, digital marketing, but you need some new knowledge, you can go up on the JM website and download any of the slides that are available on that particular topic. There's a lot of stuff up there now. There's probably 100 or so slide decks. You can look for promotions and things that are related to the Journal of Marketing. And then I can take a few questions. Let me just mention, since there were a few questions asked earlier about the stop sharing for this, about the metrics for the Journal of Marketing.
Yeah, if you can show, should be nice. Walter even ask about the metrics for the last year, and we have just a few minutes more to finish this session.
Okay, so I can. So
I ask people if they have some question they can put here, and when you organize the metrics to show.
Yeah, I'm actually just going to talk about the metrics. So the Journal of Marketing received 733 submissions last year, and we're on track to beat that number this year. So you can see that that number has just been increasing by 10 to 15% every year. Our acceptance rate is about 8%. So you can see it's pretty competitive to find a place. Our turnaround time is fast though. So on average, we take about 45 days to process your paper. And our desk reject rate is about 47%. So a lot of papers do get desk rejected. And some of that number is a little bit high. I would say it's probably closer to 40%, which is pretty consistent with the other major journals. And so those are some of the metrics that might be useful to all of you. We're on track to accept about 60 papers this year, which would be, publishing 10 papers in each of the 6 issues. So I hope that's helpful in terms of the numbers. But what other final questions do you have?
Let me see here. No, most of people just thank you for your sharing, your experience. They thank you also the coordination for choosing you to come here to the presentation. And let me see here. Some people talking about social media measures to measure consumer participation in the marketing expenditure. So that's some kind of interesting market to evaluate, research to do about how can you measure using the social media, what is going on about the companies, the results,
Yeah, that's an very active area in the field right now. So I would look at what's being published in the journals. I think that would be helpful just to see, what people are saying about it right now.
I think that's all. That's all.
Okay.
Professor Moorman, I really appreciate your presentation again. Many people here saying I send for the chat. Thank you, Professor Moorman. You have been packed for your ideas since the trust paper in 1992, 1993,
Wow.
in JMR,
Wow.
JM. Thank you. So they are. Thank
That's
you. Congratulations for everything. I really appreciate it. Was very kind to accept, and your presentation was very good. I think that I will disturb you in some moment after our conference to ask you about that the CMO research you did, because some professors already talked to me, Emilio, you have to think in something about Brazil, how you can get some information from the real market, what is going on, and see what you can relate to the real results for the market and create new research. So we will talk later.
Yeah,
and
that's definitely.
If you want to say last word, please.
Yeah, I just want to finish, but first of all, thank you very much for the kind remarks, all of you. It's always fun to talk to people, especially people who want to learn how to improve their research. I will say that I was an unlikely contributor to this part of the field. I think, if my sense is that if I could end up doing this, that most of you can end up doing this, that it does take hard work. I think it does take making some connections and learning as much as you can from other people. That's why breaking out of your silos is so important. And talking to people, go to the conferences, make those connections, keep reading the papers, because reading the papers will help you see, how to do it. But then also, as we really stress, make sure that you do spend enough time in the real world to know what those interesting problems are and important problems are. So find that balance in your work, and best of luck. I hope to see you at some of the Journal of Marketing events, and I hope to see your research at the Journal of Marketing. It would be my pleasure.
Oh, great. Thank you very much, Professor.
You're
so
welcome.
have a good evening and have a good time. Thank you all. Thank you all the audience, and see you next time. I'd like to say to the audience that we have the meeting about the opening of the conference. So we have the awards from the participants about the best paper in the conference at 6:15. So thank you very much. Thank you, Professor. Have a good time. Bye-bye.
Take
Appreciate
care.
it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.